Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and everything in between. Welcome back to another episode of Geeks Watch. Now, before we start, I am going to say there is going to be some spoilery bits in this, which I try to avoid doing, but I do want to talk about this film, giving the upcoming dates. I think this will go out before a relevant date. So I did want to talk about the film, and I like the film. So today I want to talk about the 2006 film V for Vendetta, an image of which you will see here. Is an adaptation of Alan Moore's comic book of the same name. And I'm going to go over some main story beats as the film opens and progresses. The film opens showing a young woman getting ready for an evening out, and a figure in what looks like a theater dressing room putting on a costume, putting on a mask in front of a mirror, a Guy Fawkes mask. And they're both watching the same television program. They're watching someone, the film takes place in Britain. They're watching some British propagandist talking about how great Britain is and how much America sucks and how much America has fallen and been degraded in recent times. And he is pretty obnoxious. This film appears to take place in the somewhat near future, where things have happened. And the young woman goes out. She is accosted by a group of gentlemen who are apparently government agents, which means they feel they can do whatever they want. The character in the mask rescues her, identifies himself as V, and she identifies herself as Evie. The character of V is very dramatic, very exaggerated presence. Takes her with him, says he'll escort her home safely, but she has to come with him first, which she agrees to. He then blows up the Old Bailey, which is a British governmental building in London, seemingly laughing with glee while she looks on horrified. It's all over the news, but they cover it up. The government covers it up, saying it was a planned demolition. We find out that Evie works at the news station as a minor clerk. V then shows up, unbeknownst to her, takes control of the television station through terrorist means, and broadcasts a message claiming he was responsible for the blowing up the building, and that he thinks there's something wrong with the country. The police show up because they have identified Evie in surveillance photographs of standing near V, and they're actually there to try and find her. She, after seeing his broadcast and the message that he put out, decides to help him escape, at which point she's knocked unconscious. V takes her back to his lair and essentially keeps her there because he's afraid if he lets her go, the police will interrogate her and find out where his hideout is. Plans to keep her there for a year, and they wind up discussing philosophy, a bit about the government, about how things used to be before the current government, run by Adam Sutler, took control, that he has eliminated all the freedoms of the country. It's a complete fascist totalitarian government. They've made homosexuality illegal. They've made being a Muslim illegal. People like that are rounded up and sent to concentration camps. Or, well, they're rounded up and they disappear and they're never seen from again. And V has this whole plan to change things, to make things the way they were. And they kind of bond. Even though she's still a prisoner, she does agree with some of the things that he says. V does kill a couple more people, which Evie is horrified about. She says she'll help him get to another one, but she betrays him, escapes, is caught by the police, and interrogated. Put in a dank, dismal cell with no lighting, and and the police are trying to track them down. There's a whole lot of drama. I'm not going to go any further. That's basically the first and second acts of the film in a broad stroke. I'm going to admit that when I first saw this movie in the theater, I did not like it. But that's because the trailers had advertised it as an action-packed movie, and it's really not. There are some action sequences. There's a couple good fight scenes I happen to like, although they're very Matrixy. This film was made by the Wachowski siblings, so they're the ones who made The Matrix. They made this film. But after subsequent viewings, I've come to like it more and more. I really like the character of V. He's very verbose. He talks a lot, and this film is very character driven, very dialogue driven. He's not the only character that I like, but he is very much of a dramatis personae. He is overly dramatic, overly verbal, but very eloquent, and he has a definite philosophy. And his character changes throughout the film. I mean, the main character is Evie, and she's got some great lines too. I mean, her character changes. Both of them have a character arc, although he's less so than hers. And there are some in the beginning, he is very much, he seems more unhinged when we first meet him than later in the film. But he really does espouse an interesting philosophy that one of the lines there's some really great lines in the film. One of them is that people shouldn't be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people. And that seems to be part of his idea of, he's out for people. He's out for the people who have made things the way they are. People who have manipulated the people of the country through fear and intimidation and, in some cases, outright violence, to just set themselves up in charge as dictators of the British people. Man, I just love this film. But like I said, I came to enjoy it more and more the more I watched it. One of the few criticisms that I have of this film is that the bad guys are just so cartoonishly villainous. There's very little depth to them at all. I mean, the people that we see the most of, Evie Hammond, V, the inspector who's trying to find out who V is and stop him, those people have depth, and they're really well written. The other villainous characters in the film, the other members of the government, Creedy, who's head of the secret police, and Adam Sutler, who is the High Chancellor of the British government, who is essentially Hitler. I mean, Adam Sutler, Adolf Hitler, that's not subtle. They picked the name that sounded like Adolf Hitler. A lot of the imagery is evocative of the Nazi regime too. So, and the fact that, instead of persecuting the Jews, they're persecuting the Muslims. But there's also the same, persecution of the homosexuals as well, which is a big Nazi thing too. But that's my criticism of the film, is that the villains don't have a lot of depth. They're overly cartoonishly evil. But really, aside from a couple other minor details, that's my only personal criticism of the film. I do know that Alan Moore, who wrote the comic book this is based on, has completely distanced himself from the film. The original comic book dealt more about between anarchy and fascism, about two opposing ideologies and how they, met, and how they combated each other, because V was an anarchist and the High Chancellor was a fascist. But in Alan Moore's comic book, also there were no heroes, and that's a big thing about anything Alan Moore writes. There are no heroes. Everyone kind of sucks in Alan Moore's books. So I very much prefer this to the comic book. I had a roommate when I was a teenager who was a huge fan of the comic book, and I have read it. But yeah, I find it hard to get into some of Alan Moore's writing because of his very dim and dismal outlook on everything. So this, I think, to me, is an improvement upon the original. But that's my taste. I know a lot of people who were fans of the comic book had similar problems with that Alan Moore did. Alan Moore wouldn't even take any payment for the film. He wanted his name struck from it and would accept no royalties from the making of this film. So he's really pissed. I admit the movies that are based on his comic books don't always stay as true to the original medium. And this is one of them, although I think this is one of the few that actually did his work better in my opinion. A couple other little small, I know that Hugo Weaving wasn't the first choice for V, the character of V. The other actor backed out, I think, due to creative differences. And I do think also that I found that because the mask muffled Hugo Weaving's voice so much, they had to actually re-record all of his dialogue afterwards. And they had to work really hard, they had to work really hard to give him, to portray his emotions through merely physical gestures and body posture, because you couldn't see his face. It was behind the mask. And the fact that he could just go back and re-record everything and still convey all the same emotions, I always found very impressive. And the fact that V does convey his emotions purely through body language, because you do hear his voice, you hear the tone of his voice, but you also see, the subtle tilts of his head, the gestures that he makes, how he carries himself. You can see the emotions that he has without having to see his facial expressions. That always really impresses me when someone can pull that off. And because you can't see his face, he disappears into the character. I know that watching other films with him in it, I wind up seeing, I hear his voice and it's like, okay, it's, the agent from the Matrix, but he really does, because of the mask, he really does disappear into the role for this. And he has some incredible dialogue. I'm not sure how much the dialogue that I personally like was lifted directly from the comic book. I know there's one line that he has, and I'm pretty sure wasn't, because it's frivolous. And Alan Moore doesn't really do frivolous in his dialogue. So still, I like it. Other criticism of the film is that the writing of the film was Alan Moore's direct criticism of Margaret Thatcher and her far-right political ideology. And this film is more centered towards an American audience, which means it's more, it's softened a bit. Like I said, V was supposed to be an anarchist in the comic books, and he is much more not dedicated to anarchy. He still thinks there's, it's not as strictly implied or heavily implied that he wants an anarchist government. He just thinks that there should be a new government. The old world's been torn down. A new world needs to be put in its place that is different and better. So not quite a complete change of the status quo. The fact that it's changed to more, American neoliberalism. So there are some critiques. But this is still one of those films that I drag out every November. Remember, the 5th of November, the gunpowder treason and plot. I can think of no reason the gunpowder treason should ever be forgot. Which V does say in the beginning of the film. A lot of good imagery. There have been some criticisms about the fact that People have said the sets were very sparse, which I never noticed, really. But I think it might have been that the dialogue held me in place and held my attention enough that I never really noticed it in the background. I still don't think I noticed it going back and watching it again. But I really love this movie. This is just such a fun movie for me to watch. And I never get tired of it. It's one of those films that I really just have to sit, if I see it when I'm flipping through channels, on the rare occasions that I watch television, I will sit and watch this stupid thing. Anyway, I think I've rambled on enough and spoiled enough of the story. I tried to keep the ending a secret. I hate spoilers, so if you've never seen the film, I really would recommend it. I really do like this film, and I would highly recommend it. Just know that it's only got a couple of really heavy action sequences, and the rest of the movie is more dialogue and character driven. So, as always, thanks for watching. As always, this stuff is crap. And until next time, good hunting.